This Boros deck is a dedicated equipment build that wants to achieve victory through combat. The goal of this deck is very straightforward. We want to attach the most powerful equipment in Magic's history to our generals or other equipment-friendly creatures and send them into combat. Due to the presence of numerous spells and abilities that allow us to bypass equip costs, coupled with two partner commanders with very low mana values, this build can develop threatening board states very quickly, particularly by pressuring our opponents with potentially lethal commander damage during very early portions of the game. With a surprisingly high number of Boros-colored tutor and card-drawing spells and effects inundating the 99 of this build, replenishing our resources and advancing our board state will leave our opponents overwhelmed and eventually defeated.
Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. In this Boros partner build, we're going to begin the deck tech discussion with our mono-red commander, Rograkh, son of Rohgahh. It's a 0/1 Kobold Warrior for 0 mana. It has 3 very nice keywords with First Strike, Menace, and Trample. Rograkh is going to carry the equipment in our deck very, very well. Alongside Rograkh in this build is Akiri, Line-Slinger, a 0/3 core soldier ally for Boros colors. Akiri also has First Strike and Vigilance, and she gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. So if our equipment are not even equipped to Akiri, she will still benefit by getting the power boost. The goal of this deck is very straightforward. We want to take our 2 very cheap, very cost-efficient commanders, have them carry as much equipment as we can by cheating them into play and cheating the equip costs, and then win the game via lethal commander damage. These are the equipment that we have included in this deck, and there are over 2 dozen to talk about. The first we're going to discuss is Colossus Hammer. With a CMC of 1 and an equip cost of 8, equipped creature is going to get +10/+10 and lose flying. The mana value is great, the +10/+10 is even better, particularly in a deck that's schemed around delivering lethal commander damage. The lose flying portion of this equipment is not going to be bothersome to us because we're going to have many, many other ways to give our creatures evasion. Additionally, the Equip 8, we will never be paying 8 to equip this equipment. More on that later in this deck tech. Next up, we have Commander's Plate, again with the CMC of 1. This is going to give equipped creature +3/+3, and it will have protection from each color that's not in our commander's color identity. We will be able to equip this to one of our commanders for 3 mana, or equip it to one of our other creatures for 5. So for the purposes of this deck tech, Commander's Plate is going to give one of our commanders protection from blue, black, and green with a power toughness boost of 3/3. Next, we have Eater of Virtue, again with a CMC of 1. Whenever equipped creature dies, we're going to exile it. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. As long as a card exiled with Eater of Virtue has flying, equipped creature will have flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance, and all of this for an equip cost of just 1. So putting Eater of Virtue onto either one of our commanders will give this equipment the keywords that the commander has when the commander ends up dying. We can expect that to happen a lot because we're trying to deliver the lethal commander damage, and each time we do, Eater of Virtue is going to get stronger and stronger. Just imagine this equipment that gives one of our commanders First Strike, Menace, Trample, and Vigilance. Or if we decide to just take that equipment and put it onto one of our other creatures to pose an additional threat, either way, Eater of Virtue is just going to get better and better as the game goes on. Our next artifact is Shadow Spear, again with a mana value of 1. Equipped creature is going to get +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. We can pay 1 mana and have permanents our opponents control to lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And this is going to come with a nice equip cost of only 2. Shadow Spear will help us to swing the life damage, giving one of our creatures trample. The lifelink is going to be nice. The nice little power and toughness boost is also a beneficial thing. And let's not overlook the ability to have our opponents lose indestructible and hexproof on their permanents. And it's not just it's not just one opponent, it's all of our opponents. Our next equipment, and the last one with a mana value of 1, it is Masterwork of Ingenuity. This is going to come into play as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. Just make sure you don't use this to copy one of our legendary equipment, because of the legend rule, we're just going to have to sacrifice it anyways. So far, the Shadow Spear and Eater of Virtue are our legendary equipment that we've talked about so far. Master of Ingenuity can come down and really, really do a number if we're able to, say, I don't know, copy a Colossal Hammer. All right, let's move forward. The first equipment that we have with a mana value of 2, it is Conqueror's Flail. Equipped creature is going to get +1/+1 for each color among permanents we control. So really, this is just going to give our creature +2/+2. And as long as Conqueror's Flail is attached to a creature, our opponents can't cast spells during our turn. So this is going to shut down our opponents completely through the means of interacting with our commanders, which will allow us to operate and breathe a lot more freely when we're trying to deliver that lethal commander damage. Our next equipment is Hero's Blade. This is a CMC of 2. It gives the equipped creature +3/+2 and has an equip cost of 4. However, whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under our control, we may attach Hero's Blade to it. And attach it we shall. So we can just think that each time we cast one of our commanders, as long as Hero's Blade is on the battlefield and under our control, it's going to be equipped immediately to that creature, giving it a +3/+2 boost before it even enters into combat. Next equipment, we have Ring of Valkus. This has a mana value of 2. It gives the equipped creature haste, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature if it's red. And as I slowly shift Ring of Valkus down, we can see that each one of our creatures, each one of our commanders, they are red, all with an equip cost of 1. This is going to be a fantastically powerful and very underrated equipment in this deck, giving our commander haste, either one of them when it comes into play. Giving our commander haste is going to be very important so that we can swing in for damage immediately as a way in which to dodge any sorcery removal spells from our opponents. Plus, the +1/+1 counter is just a little bit of gravy on top of those biscuits. Speaking of haste, we have to go with Swiftfoot Boots. We have an equipment here with a mana value of 2, an equip cost of 1, and equipped creature has hexproof and haste. This is going to give our creature protection, and similar to Ring of Valkus, it's going to allow it to attack immediately. Next equipment, we have Sword of the Animist. It's a CMC of 2. It's going to give equipped creature +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, we may search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We are in Boros colors, so our ability to ramp out additional lands is a bit nerfed because of our color pairing. Putting a Sword of Animist on one of our commanders, putting a Sword of Animist onto one of our creatures doesn't necessarily have to be one of our commanders. Each time it enters into combat, we're going to get one of our basic lands and put it right into play tapped. The +1/+1 power toughness boost just helps to make the creature a little more threatening. And the last equipment we have here with a CMC of 2, it is going to be Umezawa's Jite. For a CMC of 2, like I said, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, please make note of that. It says whenever equipped creature does combat damage, it does not have to do combat damage to a player. So if one of our commanders is blocked, this is going to activate Umezawa's Jite. If one of our commanders is blocking one of our opponent's creatures, this is going to activate Umezawa's Jitte, and when it does, we're going to put 2 charge counters on it. We can remove a charge counter from Umezawa's Jitte and choose one of the following 3 modes. Either equipped creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn, which would be a great way to finish off one of our opponents with lethal commander damage, or target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, a great way to remove a pesky or troublesome creature from the battlefield, or we can gain 2 life if by some chance we need to gain some additional life. Umezawa's Jitte is going to be one of the most important artifacts we have in this deck, because we do not have to have the Jitte attached to one of our creatures in order to take off the counters. All right, next up we're going to have a crop here of 3 CMC equipment, and each one of these are going to give our commanders, and any of the creatures we decide to equip to them, of course, but this is primarily for our commanders, they're going to get a +2/+2 boost, a +2/+2 boost, that is, and protection from 2 different colors. You knew it was only a matter of time until we started rolling out the swords. Well, here's each one we could possibly include in this deck tech. Here we have Sword of Fire and Ice. This is going to give the equipped creature a boost of +2/+2 and protection from Izzet colors. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, Sword of Fire and Ice will deal 2 damage to target creature or player, and we draw a card. So as long as we can connect with some combat damage, we're going to shock something and draw a card. Next sword is Light and Shadow. There's the +2/+2. It's going to give equipped creature protection from Orzhov colors, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we will gain 3 life, and we may return up to 1 target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. As you will see later on in this deck tech, there are some extremely valuable creatures included in the 99 that are going to help us synergize our equipment strategy. Having a way in which to recur those creatures right back to our hand in Boros colors is one of sort of Light and Shadow's abilities down there on the text box is going to be very valuable in the mid to long game. Next up, we have Sword of Body of Mind. There's the +2/+2, giving equipped creature protection from Simic colors. Whenever this equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we're going to create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, and that player will mill the top 10 cards of their library. The milling, you'll have to keep an eye on that, because you certainly don't want to send an equipped creature with Sword of Body of Mind at an opponent that wants cards in their graveyard. So make sure you know exactly what's going on the battlefield and point that creature in the direction of someone who's not trying to utilize their graveyard as an extension of their hand. Not that commander players do that all the time, right? And again, the additional 2/2 green wolf creature will be a nice guy to hold back and, protect our life total or send into combat if needed. Our next sword is Feast and Famine, +2/+2 and protection from Golgari colors. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player will discard a card, and we untap all lands we control. Having the ability to use our mana from our lands twice in the same turn, all we have to do is connect with some combat damage with Sword of Feast of Famine attached to that creature, and we're going to be able to do that. Sword number 5 is War and Peace, +2/+2 and protection from Boros colors. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, Sword of War and Peace will deal damage to that player equal to the number of cards in their hand, and we're going to gain 1 life for each card in our hand. So this is going to be a great way in which to deal some additional peripheral right to the face damage, which isn't going to count towards our lethal commander damage, but will still help to tick down the life totals of our opponents straight down to 0. Additionally, the incidental life gain may come in handy because, let's face it, we're going all-out assault with our commanders, and in traditional Boros ways, we're not playing much in the realm of defense. Sword number 6 is the Sword of Sinew and Steel, +2/+2 and protection from Rakdos colors. When equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we will destroy up to 1 target planeswalker and up to 1 target artifact. Pay close attention to that text. The destruction of the planeswalker and the destruction of the artifact do not have to be from the defending player. So this could swing into an opponent, deal some commander damage, and then we can blow up a planeswalker and or an artifact from any number of our other opponents. All right, sword number 7, we have the Sword of Truth and Justice. There's your +2/+2 and protection from Azorius colors. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we will put a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control and then proliferate. For all intents and purposes, this is most likely going to put a +1/+1 counter onto one of our commanders, and then we're going to put an additional one right after that. Thank you, proliferate. And lastly, sword of number 7, we have Sword of Hearth and Home, +2/+2, and protection from Selesnya colors. When this equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we will blink a creature we own and then search our library for a basic land and put both of those onto the battlefield under our control. The blinking aspect of that is not going to be extraordinarily helpful because we're not going to have many, not completely. There are going to be some creatures that are going to benefit from getting blinked, I can tell you that. But this is not a blink or flicker deck. The searching our library for a basic land and putting that card into play, well, that's just wonderful, particularly because we already have included Sword of the Animist. All right, so there is the Mythic Sword cycle. There's the 7 for 7. The 8 for 8. And to wrap things up here, another sword with a CMC of 3. This one's a little bit different, however. This isn't one of the Mythic cycle swords, but it is definitely valuable enough to include in this deck, and that's Sword of Vengeance. CMC of 3, equip cost of 3, equip creature gets +2/+2 and has first strike, vigilance, trample, and haste. That haste we cannot overlook. The value haste is going to have for the commanders in this deck. We want them to hit the ground running so that we can avoid any and all sorcery removal spells from our opponents. Our last CMC equipment here is going to be Maul of the Skyclaves. This underloved equipment is 2 and a white mana with an equip cost of 2 and 2 white mana. And when Maul of the Skyclave enters the battlefield, we can attach it to target creature we control. It's going to give equipped creature +2/+2 and flying and first strike. All right, with just a handful of equipment left here in this portion of the deck tech, we move forward with the first and only mana value 4 equipment, and that's going to be Hammer of Nazan. With a CMC of 4 and an equip cost of 4, it's going to give equipped creature +2/+0 and indestructible. And whenever Hammer of Nazan or another equipment enters the battlefield under our control, we may attach that equipment to target creature we control. This has a very, very valuable effect because, as we mentioned earlier in this deck tech, having this equipment in play is going to allow us to skirt right around any equip costs. Our next equipment, and the first and only one with a mana value of 5, it is Batterskull. We're going to pay 5. It's going to come into play. It is a living weapon, which means when Batterskull ETBs, we're going to create a 0/0 black germ creature token and then attach Batterskull to it. It's going to give equipped creature +4/+4 vigilance and lifelink. With an equip cost of 5, again, we're going to have, as you've already seen, and there are more on the way, I can promise you that, we're never going to pay 5 to equip this equipment. And lastly, we can pay 3 and return the Batterskull to our hand. This will allow us to cast it again, getting the living weapon to kick in, putting it onto the germ token if needed, if for some reason our commanders are indispensable. Next equipment is, with a CMC of 6, we have Argentum Armor. Equipped creature is going to get +6/+6. Whenever equipped creature attacks, it's going to destroy target permanent. Pay close attention to that text. It doesn't even have to deal combat damage. All it has to do is be declared as an attacker and go into combat, and we are blowing up target permanent. And with a CMC of 6, you may think that's a little bit intimidating. However, as we've demonstrated so far, and as we will continue to demonstrate as we move along further in this deck tech, we are never going to pay 6 mana to equip Argentum Armor. Our second to last equipment here, it is Embercleave. 4 and 2 red, and we can cast this for flash. Additionally, this spell will cost 1 less to cast for each attacking creature we control. When Embercleave ETBs, we can attach it to target creature we control. Equipped creature is going to get +1/+1, double strike, and trample. This could be an absolute game ender, particularly if Colossus Hammer is on one of our commanders, and we send that commander into combat, and then we flash in the Embercleave, attaching it to that commander. Suddenly, we're dealing lethal commander damage in one swipe if the creature is left unblocked and uninteracted. Embercleave also has a very reasonable equip cost of 3. And lastly, the last equipment, and it is a CMC of 7, it is Cauldron Complete. It, like Batterskull, also is a living weapon. So when this ETBs, we're going to create a 0/0 black germ creature token, and we're going to attach Cauldron Complete to it. This artifact is indestructible. Equipped creature is going to get +5/+5, first strike, trample, indestructible, haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, that creature will get exiled. The equip cost is 7, but once more, we are never going to pay 7 to equip this equipment. This is most likely game over if we can get this on one of our commanders, particularly if that commander also has some protection. And speaking of protection, you may be wondering, where is Lightning Greaves? Lightning Greaves is not in this deck tech because it has Shroud, and Shroud is going to prohibit us from attaching any other equipment or auras to any of our creatures that is equipped by Lightning Greaves. Just having the Lightning Greaves in play on one creature will give it haste and will give it Shroud, but we can do nothing more to get that creature to become more powerful. That's why Swiftfoot Boots was a lot more favorable and preferable in this deck, having the Lightning Greaves on one of our commanders, and we need to have another creature in play to unequip Lightning Greaves to put other equipment onto it before we put Lightning Greaves back on there. It's just too difficult to do because this is not a creature-driven deck. This is an equipment-driven deck. Everything selected in this deck tech, our 2 commanders, our 26 equipment, and all of the rest of the spells and abilities are all being chosen to synergize the power of the equipment that we've included in this deck. There will be some additional creatures, but there's just not enough to warrant the risk of having one creature, maybe it's one of our commanders, have a Lightning Greaves on it, and we have no other way to get it off. These spells are going to synergize and enhance the equipment theme that we have woven into this Boros partner deck. And the first card we're going to talk about is Sigarda's Aid. This enchantment for 1 white mana will allow us to cast our aura and equipment spells as though they had flash. And whenever an equipment ETBs under our control, we may attach it to target creature we control. This is just another example of the many ways that we're going to dance right around the equip costs of all of our equipment. Next up, we have Enlightened Tutor. Instant speed, 1 white mana. Search our library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it to all players, shuffle our library, and put that card right on top of it. Steel Shaper's Gift is next. It's sorcery speed this time, but still for 1 white mana. This will allow us to search our library for an equipment card, reveal it, and put it right into our hand. Moving up to a CMC of 2, we have Fighter Class. So when Fighter Class ETBs, we're going to search our library for an equipment card, we're going to reveal it, and then put it into our hand. We can then at some point later on, we can pay 1 and Boros colors to go to level 2 of fighter class and have equip abilities we activate cost 2 less to activate. Now, this will not necessarily make all of the equip costs free for all of our equipment, but this is just another example of a way in which we can dance around the full equip costs of all of our equipment. And lastly, if we choose to invest another 3 and Boros colors into this fighter class, whenever a creature we control attacks, up to 1 creature blocks it this combat if able. So this is kind of like a pseudo-provoke ability. We're not going to necessarily be able to untap one of our opponent's creatures to force it to block. It's okay to try to get rid of any troublesome or problematic creatures that we need off of the battlefield. But let's be honest, fighter class is included in this deck for its ETB trigger and its level 2 equip ability reduction. Next up, we have a creature, our first creature of the deck tech that's not spending time in the command zone. It is Leonin Shikari. It's a cat soldier for 2/2 and 1 in white mana, and this will allow us to play equip abilities anytime we could play an instant. Can you imagine living in a world where all of the equip abilities of your equipment are 0, and you can equip them to your creatures at instant speed? We're going to do that in this deck tech. Next up, back to our sorceries, we have Open the Armory. 1 and a white, we may search our library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. All right, so just a moment ago, we were talking about the world living with Leonin Shikari and being able to have our equipment dance around the battlefield, going to our creatures, going from one creature to another, all at instant speed, all for 0 equip cost. Here's the other creature that can make that happen. That is Pure Steel Paladin. 2 white mana for a 2/2 human knight. Whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card. Yes, please. This also has the Metalcraft mechanic. Equipment we control have equip 0 as long as we control 3 or more artifacts. We will always control 3 or more artifacts outside of, shatter storms or massive board wipes. So Pure Steel Paladin, as long as we have the Metalcraft activated, in conjunction with Leonin Shikari, will allow us to move our equipment among our creatures at instant speed anytime we want. And can you imagine the combat headaches that will give to all of our opponents? Another creature we're going to talk about here is Rayav, Master Smith. It's a 2/2 dwarf artificer for Boros colors. Whenever a creature we control that's enchanted or equipped and it's attacking, that creature will gain double strike until end of turn. Having Rayav on the battlefield with 1 or both of our commanders carrying massive amounts of equipment, giving that creature double strike is just going to make the game end that much more quickly. Another creature, we have Sram, Senior Edificer. It's a 2/2 Dwarf Advisor for 1 and 1 white mana. And whenever we cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, we will draw a card. So having Sram in play and the Pure Steel Paladin will put 2 cards into our hand if we successfully cast our equipment and get it to enter the battlefield. Earlier in this deck tech, we were talking about the ability of flickering and blinking our creatures and how sometimes that will be beneficial, but this is not a dedicated flicker deck. Here's one of the ways in which it would benefit us a great deal, and that's with Stoneforge Mystic. 1/2 Core Artificer for 1 and 1 white mana. When Stoneforge Mystic ETBs, we may search our library for an equipment card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. We may pay 1 and a white mana and tap Stoneforge Mystic to put an equipment card from our hand onto the battlefield. So you can imagine having Stoneforge Mystic in play, and maybe we also have Sigarda's Aid. We can just turn Stoneforge Mystic sideways for the investment of 2 mana, and suddenly we're throwing a Cauldron Complete into play. Or we're throwing an Argentum Armor into play, all for the investment of just 2 mana and tapping that Core Artificer. All right, ticking up to a mana value of 3, and we're going to continue our run of creatures here. It is Akiri version 2.0. This time, She's the Fearless Voyager, a 3/3 core warrior for 1 in Boros colors. Whenever we attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, we draw a card. We are going to make the equipment pay off in this deck every single way possible. We can pay a white mana, and we may unattach an equipment from a creature we control, and if we do, we tap that creature and it gains indestructible until end of turn. A great way to keep one of our equipped creatures on the battlefield in the face of an imminent board wipe. Next up, in the last creature with a CMC of 3 in this deck, we have Arden, Intrepid Archaeologist. It's a 2/2 core scout for 2 and 1 white mana. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we may attach any number of auras and equipment we control to target permanent or player. Now, there is some popularity with Arden and Rograkh as Boros partners in this same type of build. For me, I wanted there to be 2 different commander attacking threats. I wanted, in most instances, I wanted Rograkh to come down early, get equipped, and start whipping around the commander damage. And once one of our opponents decides to interact and deal with Rograkh, and most likely send Rograkh to the command zone, Akiri will come down and start picking up the pieces at just an investment of 2 mana. Or we can just bring Rograkh back again. I wanted there to be 2 different attacking threats in this deck because we're making sure that we get the best use out of all of the equipment, and spreading those equipment around the 2 different commanders will make it a lot easier in which to deliver that lethal commander damage, so that Rograkh's overall CMC doesn't tick up to 12 or 14 because of all of the commander attacks. Our run of creatures continues with Armored Sky Hunter, a 3/3 cat knight with flying for 3 and 1 white mana. Whenever Armored Sky Hunter attacks, we can look at the top 6 cards of our library, and we may put an aura or equipment card from among them onto the battlefield. If an equipment is put onto the battlefield this way, we may attach it to a creature we control. Then we put the rest of those cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. Here's another example of a way in which we can just gift one of the equipment from the top 6 cards of our library right into play, and we do have the numbers to make sure, on average, every 4 cards that we draw should give us an equipment. So every time we turn Armored Sky Hunter sideways, and it has the wonderful evasion too, we're going to hope to get one of those equipment and put it right onto the battlefield and equip it for free to one of our creatures. Next up, we have Brunor Battlehammer, a 5/3 dwarf warrior for 2 in 2 in Boros colors. Orzhov? Where's Orzhov? Okay, so each creature we control will get +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. Let's just stop right there. If that's all Brunor Battlehammer gave us, it would still be included in this deck. Can you imagine? Let's just slowly bring Brunor down here to show our 2 commanders. Can you imagine each time we equip one of our equipment to one of our commanders, it gets an additional +2/+0? Throw 3 equipment on Rograkh, and all of a sudden at a baseline he's getting +6. Plus, with the Menace and the Trample and the First Strike, it's only going to be a matter of time until we deal that lethal commander damage. But for some reason, Brunor is even better, because we may pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability we activate each turn. Although this is a little more limited and restricted than something like, say, Sigarda's Aid or Pure Steel Paladin, it's still just another example of a way in which we can skirt and dance right through paying full cost for all of the equipment, for all of the equipabilities of our equipment. All right, next up we have Halvar, God of Battle, a 4/4 god for 2 and 2 white mana. Creatures we control that are enchanted or equipped, they have double strike. So imagine Brunor and Halvar on the battlefield together, and any one of our commanders over there have 2, 3, maybe 4 different equipments on them. Oh, baby, it's only a matter of time until we win that game. At the beginning of each combat, we may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature we control to target creature we control. So again, this is going to allow us to just move an equipment back and forth without having to worry about any of the equip costs. And if we are unsatisfied with Halvar as the creature, well, we have the ability to cast Halvar's Backside, which in this instance, for 1 and 1 white mana, we will get Sword of the Realm. Equipped creature will get +2/+0 and Vigilance. And whenever equipped creature dies, we can return it to its owner's hand. So to think that we're going to attract a lot of attention with what we're going to do with our 2 commanders, it's not outside the realm of feasibility to think that they will be highly targeted each and every time. If we put Sword of the Realms out onto the battlefield and equip it for either its 1 and 1 white equip cost or with any of the ways in which we can cheat it onto one of our creatures. If that creature dies, we're going to send it back to our hand rather than the command zone at an inflated tax of 2 additional mana the next time we cast it. Either way, Halvar, God of Battle, or the equipment on his backside, very valuable addition in this type of deck. Running to an end is our streak of creatures, as now we're going to look at a CMC4 sorcery spell called Reckless Crew. This we're going to call an insurance policy. For 3 and 1 red mana, we will create X 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of vehicles we control plus the number of equipment we control. We will control no vehicles in this deck. This is a dedicated equipment deck. We've already talked about the 26 earlier in this deck tech, in addition to Halvar's Backside giving us equipment number 27. So for each of those tokens that we create, where X is the number of equipment we control, we may attach an equipment to each one of those creatures. So let's say, for instance, we've got 5 equipment laying on the battlefield. Our commanders have been taxed back to the Stone Age. Let's cast Reckless Crew. Let's create 5 2/1 dwarfs. Let's attach an equipment to each one of them. And now we have 5 2/1 dwarf berserker creature tokens that are going to get the abilities of those equipment. It is a backup plan. This will allow us to continue to engage in combat, not necessarily making our opponents get closer and closer to lethal commander damage, but it will be a way in which for us to buy time and draw the game out if we need to do so. Our last creature, it is Stonehewer Giant, a 4/4 giant warrior with vigilance for 3 and 2 white mana. We may pay 1 and a white mana, turn Stonehewer Giant sideways, and search our library for an equipment card and put it into play and attach it to creature we control. And then we shuffle our library. So Stonehewer Giant is going to do exactly what we've been aiming to do, except this time for the investment of 1 and white mana and turning him sideways, we can go through our library and look for any equipment we want, put it into play, and attach it to a creature we control. And even better, I mean, it doesn't really matter because we don't have a Lightning Greaves or any equipment that gives Shroud. It is important to note that it says attach it to creature we control and not target creature we control. Again, that doesn't really play into this particular deck tech, but that might be something to think about for anyone who might want to include some of the equipment that give the creature Shroud. This will dance around that. And the last card to talk about in this subsection of the deck tech, we have Open the Vaults. Sorcery speed for 4 and 2 white. Return all artifact and enchantment cards from all graveyards to the battlefield under their owner's control. This is, again, another potential backup plan. And similarly to what we were talking about earlier, you want to make sure you know what your opponent's decks are doing. You really don't want to cast this if you're sitting across somebody who's been running auras all day long, or maybe shrines all day long, and there are just a ton of them in the graveyard. However, if you're looking into the graveyards of your opponents and you notice that they're very, relatively thin with artifacts or enchantments, and there's been a couple of massive board wipes sending some of our prize artifacts and enchantments to our graveyard, Open the Vaults could be one of those cards that we cast that ends up helping to win us the game. These are our removal spells, and the first one should come as no surprise. Swords to Plowshares is one of the most powerful spells we can use in our deck. 1 white mana at instant speed, exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. There are actually times that we could use this on our own creatures as a way in which to stave off potential elimination. If we have Swords of Plowshares as removal spell 1A of all time, removal spell 1B is right behind it, and that's Path to Exile. Instant speed, 1 white mana, exile target creature. Its controller searches their library for a basic land and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. And similarly to Swords to Plowshares, we could target one of our own creatures to do that if we need the land. For the purposes of this deck and how we are helping to synergize an equipment strategy, this may be removal spell 1C. This is Dispatch. For 1 white mana at instant speed, we'll tap target creature. However, if we have at least 3 or more artifacts, which will trigger our Metalcraft mechanic, then we exile that creature instead. And if you look at that, that's where the text ends. No one gains life, no one gets a gifted basic land into play, and you better believe we will have Metalcraft at all times. Well, hopefully, outside of a Shatterstorm, of course. Alright, next removal spell. This one's going to be either targeted or mass, but it's not going to affect us. Winds of Abandon. Sorcery speed. For 1 white mana, we can cast the spell to exile target creature we don't control. For each creature that's exiled like this, its controller will search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We do have the option to overload this, and if we pay 4 and 2 white mana, then we are going to exile each creature we don't control. And for each creature that we don't control that's exiled this way, its controller is going to put onto the battlefield from their library a basic land tapped. This could backfire. It really is going to be dependent on the game state. It's really going to be dependent on how many basic lands are your opponents playing with. If you're sitting down and you're at a table full of mono color commander decks, you better have a really good reason to cast that Winds of Abandon. However, if you've got a bunch of 4, maybe 5 color decks, Winds of Abandon might be a steal when you overload it, because let's be honest, there are not going to be many players that are going to be playing with mana bases filled with basic lands if you're playing with so many additional colors. Again, that's going to be a judgment call, but I like to have that backup in there just in case. Our next removal spell, I should actually say our next removal spells, because it's Wear and Tear. For instant speed, for 1 white mana, we destroy target enchantment. And for instant speed, for 1 and 1 red mana, we destroy target artifact. So let's jam 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 red, and let's destroy one of each. Next up, we have Generous Gift. 2 and a white at instant speed. We'll pick any target permanent and destroy it. Its controller will be gifted with a 3/3 green elephant creature token. But this is Commander. We are not worried about a 3/3 green elephant creature token. We're more worried about that Maze of Ith that keeps untapping Rograkh and Akiri. Keeps untapping Rograkh and keeps removing him from combat. Next removal spell, and we have Chaos Warp. Instant speed, 2 and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. This card has been played for many, many moons thus far, and I'm sure everyone has their Chaos Warp story. However, it's still worth it to put it into play, because it doesn't necessarily destroy it, it doesn't bounce it, it just removes it from the battlefield with a very minuscule chance of it coming back into play. It's just that minuscule chance that always seems to haunt me. Next up, with a CMC of 4, we have Return to Dust. Instant speed, 2 and 2 white mana. We're going to exile target artifact or enchantment. However, if we cast this spell during our main phase, we may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment. This is Commander, folks. Exiling is so much better than destroying. So cast this during your main phase. Exile the 2 most problematic artifact or enchantments that are on the battlefield. Don't destroy them, because, again, this is Commander. They're just going to come back from the graveyard. And our last removal disruption spell for this subset of the video, it will be Blasphemous Act. This sorcery is 8 and 1 red mana, but I promise you we will never pay 8 for this spell, because its cost is reduced by 1 colorless mana for each creature on the battlefield, and when we cast Blasphemous Act, it will deal 13 damage to each creature. When we do cast Blasphemous Act, we hope to have one of the swords giving our creatures, or maybe multiple swords giving our creatures, protection from red, because Blasphemous Act will not deal its damage if our creatures are protected by protection from red. These are a couple of miscellaneous spells that have to find their way into this deck. Of course, you must realize if we're playing a Boros commander deck, we must play with Boros Charm. Instant speed for Boros colors will pick one of the following 3 modes. This will deal 4 damage to target player, which is just 10% of their starting life total. More importantly, however, permanents we control gain indestructible until end of turn. That is mode 2. That is a massive amount of protection for the investment of just 2 mana. Even more beneficial, particularly for the way in which this deck has been constructed, the 3rd mode reads target creature gains double strike until end of turn, as our goal is to equip one or both of our cheap, inexpensive commanders with a plethora of overpowered equipments and win the game via lethal commander damage. Any instance that we get to give one of those commanders double strike and end our opponent's game quicker than we could even imagine, well, that makes Boros Charm even more valuable, particularly in a deck like this. And the only other miscellaneous spell we have included in this deck tech, and let's be honest, this is a card that needs more love because I don't know if the community just hasn't caught up to what it can do or its potential, but this is a card that should be in any deck that plays white, and that is Akroma's Will. Instant speed for 3 and 1 white mana, we pick one of the following 2 modes. However, if we control a commander as we cast the spell, we may choose both. It is highly likely that we will be controlling at least one of our commanders when we cast Akroma's Will. So for the purposes of this deck, we are going to get both modes every time we cast it. So when we do, these are the 2 modes. Mode 1, creatures we control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. Mode 2, creatures we control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. With at least one or both of our commanders on the battlefield, we cast Akroma's Will, and they and any other creatures we also control on our side of the battlefield will gain flying, vigilance, double strike, indestructible, lifelink, and protection from all colors. This is game ending. It's game ending at instant speed for just 3 and 1 white mana. Why is that card not more loved? And our deck tech concludes with a look at the mana base. We have our lands, we have our mana rocks, and one spell that is neither. So let's begin with Jeweled Lotus. 0 CMC, it's going to come down, we're going to tap it, we're going to sack it for 3 mana of any one color, and we're going to spend that mana only to cast our commander. More importantly, we will spend that money to pay down the exorbitant taxes accrued by our opponent sending our commanders from the battlefield back to the command zone. Next up, we have Mana Crypt. It's going to be a CMC of 0. At the beginning of our upkeep, you're going to flip a coin. You're going to lose the flip and deal 3 points of damage to you like it does to me 80% of the time. But it is worth it to tap this bad boy and get 2 colorless mana to help getting our equipment from our hands out onto the battlefield. And the best artifact in our format, Soul Ring, you better believe that bad boy is going in there too. Taking up to a CMC of 2, we have our Arcane Signet. This is going to tap for 1 red or 1 white, because those are the colors of this deck. Speaking of tapping for a red or a white, that's what Talisman of Conviction will do, but it will also deal 1 point of damage to us. For a CMC of 2, this will also tap for 1 colorless mana. And of course, because we're Boros, we have to have Boros Signet. CMC of 2 will pay 1 into this, turn it sideways, and get back our Boros colors. The next, I don't know if we're going to call this Mana Rock, or maybe we can just refer to this as our Mana Ramp, but either way, it is a card that I'm surprised is not more played more loved and more valuable. Even though it is just an uncommon, let's be honest, there are several uncommons out there in the Commander format that dwarf this cost even further. And that is Moonsilver Key. Yes, it just came out in Midnight Hunt. However, what this can do and the fact that it can go into any deck boggles my mind that it doesn't have a greater value. We pay 2 to cast this. We pay 1 mana to tap it and sacrifice it, and then we search our library for an artifact card with a mana ability, which is just any one of these, or a basic land. Moonsilver Key puts any one of these artifacts into our hand, or puts a basic land into our hand. Play that in every deck. Our last artifact in this subsection of the video, it is Archaeomancer's Map. For 2 and 1 white mana, when this ETBs, we'll search our library for 2 basic planes and put them into our hand. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our opponent's control, if that player controls more lands than we do, and they probably will, then we may put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. Archaeomancer's Map will help us to get some lands into our hand, and hopefully, if our opponents are ramping out like they most likely are, we'll be able to try to keep pace. Sandwiched between our artifact spells and our lands is the only spell that is neither, and that's going to be 1 copy of Land Tax. This is an enchantment for 1 white mana. At the beginning of our upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than we do, and they most likely will, we may search our library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into our hand. Land Tax, in conjunction with Archaeomancer's Map, that's good times, everybody. That is good times. All right, it all comes down now to our land base. Let's begin with our basic lands. We have a half dozen of plains, 6 plains going in. On top of the 6 plains, we have 6 basic mountains. So we're going to roll with 12 basics in this deck, 6 plains and 6 mountains. Against my better judgment, I am going to include each one of the artifact lands. Now, generally, I tend to stray from including these in any of my decks. They become very susceptible to board wipes because they are, in fact, artifact lands. So anyone that casts a Shatterstorm, we're losing each one of these lands if they're on the battlefield and under our control. However, because of some of the synergies that these artifact lands could have in our deck, specific to pumping up Akiri's power, I think including them may just be worth the potential risk of losing them. So in so doing, we got 1 Ancient Den and 1 Great Furnace. Now, they're not going to be basic lands, but they are only going to tap to add 1 of those mana to our mana pool. All right, the following lands are all included that will in some way, shape, or form help to fix and smooth the red and white mana we need to cast our spells. And of course, the first card is the best card in the format, Command Tower. No restrictions, no limitation, 1 mana that we need of the color that we need. Sacred Foundry is our not our tap land. This is our shock land. It'll come into play tapped unless we pay 2 life. And it'll give us a red or a white mana. Spectator Seating is our fan land. It will come into play untapped as long as we have 2 or more opponents. Clifftop Retreat will come into play untapped as long as we control a plains or a mountain. Sunbaked Canyon will come into play tapped. However, we need to pay 1 life in order to get a red or white mana out of it. And if needed, we can jam a colorless mana into Sunbaked Canyon, tap it, sacrifice it, and draw a card. Sundown Pass will come into play untapped as long as we control 2 or more other lands. Battlefield Forge will come into play untapped. We can tap it for a colorless mana, or we can tap it for a red or a white, and it will deal 1 point of damage to us. Rugged Prairie, our filter land, will come down and tap for a colorless, or we can jam a red or white mana into Rugged Prairie, tap it, and add 2 red, 2 white, or 1 of each to our mana pool. Now, each of the preceding lands we're talking about in this subsection allow us to fix the mana and continue to play with the mana as long as they're on the battlefield. The following land, it's a one-shot. We have to pick it and stick with it, and that's just going to be all there is. It's going to be Needleverge Pathway. It's red on the front side, but it's white on the back side. We choose before we play which side we want it to come into play as. It's either going to be red and Needleverge or white and Pillarverge. And once we make that choice, we stick to it. We are married to that choice and hoping that we don't end in divorce. All right, so those were the lands that give us 1 mana of any of the colors we need outside of our pathway. One more land to talk about, and an interesting one to include in this deck. And it's really only included because of the inexpensive costs of our commanders. And we're going to play with a copy of Opal Palace. Now, this only taps for a colorless mana. However, we can pay 1 mana and jam it into Opal Palace, and then we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So for the purposes of this deck, of course, it's a white or a red mana. And if we spend this mana to cast our commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. With Rograkh as a mana value of 0 and Akiri as a mana value of 2, particularly in a deck where we're sending those creatures into combat every single turn because our goal is to win the game via lethal commander damage, we can expect to have those creatures hitting the command zone numerous times during each game. Opal Palace will have them come into the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counters as soon as they're cast, making them even more of a threat each time they're sent to the command zone. So although we have to add a little bit extra mana in order to get that ability, having Opal Palace in this deck, I think, is going to synergize wonderfully with those 2 low-cost commander options. All right, and the last section of this video, these are all of our non-basic lands that do not provide colored mana, but are included based upon what they do from a utility standpoint or from a mana standpoint. And we're going to start with Darksteel Citadel. This is an artifact land. It's only going to give us a colorless mana. However, as you can see, it is indestructible. I have no problems including this as a land as long as we've got that indestructible slapped on the bottom of it. You can be an artifact all day long, but as long as you still stay indestructible, you got a place in this deck. Ancient Tomb is going to go in this deck. It's going to help us to ramp out our equipment spells quicker than we should. We're going to turn this bad boy sideways for 2 colorless mana. We'll take the 2 points of damage, but we're going to get to cast our equipment spells way ahead of curve. And with that in mind, we are going to include a copy of Temple of the False God. This is going to tap for 2 colorless mana without the threat of taking damage. However, we can only activate that if we have 5 or more lands. So although it's not going to help us to ramp out our spells in the early game, mid to late game, this can definitely be helpful to cast those equipment or to pay the commander tax on our commanders. Buried Ruin is going to be included in this deck, not because it just taps for colorless mana, but because we can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice it to return an artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. Maybe one of our very valuable swords that we need to close out the game is sitting in our graveyard. We can sacrifice Buried Ruin and get that sword and get it right back into play, have one of our commanders carry it, and carry us to victory. Next land is Urza's Saga. Now, this is an enchantment land, so when it ETBs, the first lower counter is going to be put onto the Saga. And when that happens, we get to tap this to add a colorless mana. When we get to the next we get to our next turn after we draw our card, the second lower counter will go on to this, and then we can tap this to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact we control. That may be something we're going to want to do because, as I said, we have a lot of artifacts in this deck, and any kind of peripheral +1/+1 power toughness boosts that we can give, something like a token that's created off of one of our lands, I think we're going to want to take advantage of that. And then lastly, when the third lore counter goes on to Urza's Saga, we're going to sacrifice it, and then we're going to search our library with an artifact. We're going to search our library for an artifact card whose mana cost is 0 or 1, and put it onto the battlefield. So right off the bat, you're probably thinking we can get one of the artifact lands. No, we cannot. It does not have a mana cost of 0. It has a mana value of 0, but it doesn't have it in the corner of the card. So we will not be able to use Urza's Saga to fetch out one of our artifact lands. However, we do have a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt, and a Jeweled Lotus, and having Urza's Saga in play is just going to help to balance and strengthen and enhance everything that we're trying to do in this deck. Next up, and this card is included because of how many times we can expect to see our commanders hit the command zone. That's going to be one copy of Command Beacon. It taps for a colorless, but we can tap it and sacrifice it to put our commander from the command zone right into our hand. And then when we do that, we don't have to worry about paying the exorbitant commander taxes that have accumulated during all the times during the game that we've had to cast them. So if we Command Beacon Rograkh into our hand, we're casting Rograkh for no mana. Next up, we're going to play with War Room. It taps for a colorless, but we can tap 3, tap it, and pay life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity to draw a card. So for the purposes of this Boros partner deck, this is pay 3 mana, tap it, pay 2 life, draw a card. In our colors, worth it. Next, we have Slayer's Stronghold. 1 colorless mana, but we can pay Boros colors, tap Slayer's Stronghold, and give target creature +2/+0 vigilance and haste until end of turn. Again, this is one of those cards that's going to help our commanders hit the battlefield running so that we can send them into combat right away, delivering more and more of that lethal commander damage. 2 lands left to go, and of course, because this is a Boros build, and of course because we're trying to win by attacking, and of course because we want to deliver that lethal commander damage, they have to do with our creatures. So next up, we have Sunhome Fortress of the Legion. 1 colorless mana, or we can pay 2 and Boros colors and give target creature double strike until end of turn. There is a particular level of political machinations that can be taken from this card because it does say target creature. It does not say target creature we control. So we do have the sly ability to give one of our opponent's creatures double strike if we know that that creature is going to knock out one of our other opponents. More than anything, though, Sunhome is included in this deck to target Rograkh or Akiri. And here we have it. This is card number 99. I'm sorry, this is card number 98 in the 98. And the last land to talk about is Rogue's Passage. Taps for a colorless mana, or we pay 4 mana, tap it, and target commander, target creature is unblockable this turn. This could be our ultimate finisher, and this land is just another one of those examples of why we do not want to include Lightning Greaves in this deck. If we have a Lightning Greaves equipped to one of our commanders and we could deliver lethal commander damage, we can't target that creature because it has Shroud. And there you have it. This is MTG Burgeoning's Boros Partner Equipment Matters deck. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about this build in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.